The first warning wasn't the wind, it was the silence. At 26,000 feet, sound behaves differently. The world narrows into a tunnel of breath, ice, and thin metallic fear. Your mind starts to bargain in fragments. Just 10 more steps, just one more rope length, just one more minute. And yet on Everest, the mountain doesn't negotiate. It collects. They were a tight team when they left Camp 4, 4 headlamps cutting through a darkness so complete it felt like a living thing. In that black, every blink becomes a risk. Every stumble becomes a confession. The oxygen masks hissed like secrets. Their crampons bit into blue ice that could shatter a man's confidence in a heartbeat. And above them, the summit ridge waited like a blade. Then the storm arrived without permission, not the dramatic kind you see in documentaries. This one crept in quietly, like a predator, a pressure drop, a sudden hardening of the air, a horizon that vanished. Their radios crackled with half words, and the kind of pauses that make your stomach sink. One of them said something that still haunts the survivor. "I can hear footsteps, but they're not ours." Up there, the brain can turn oxygen starvation into hallucinations. Voices, shadows, a presence at your shoulder. But the mountain also has its own language. Shifting snow, snapping cornices, rope singing under strain. And when those sounds change, it means something is moving. What happened next wasn't heroic, it wasn't cinematic, it was human. A single mistake, a single decision, a single tether. And suddenly, the team that climbed together was being unstitched by the cold, one by one, into the endless white. Only one climber returned to Camp 4. He came down with frost on his eyelashes, blood in his gloves, and a look in his eyes that made hardened Sherpas step back. He refused to speak at first, but when he finally did, he said one sentence that turned every listener pale. "We didn't lose them to the storm. We lost them to something that knew we were there." The story you are about to hear is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. If you've ever watched footage of Everest and felt that chill in your chest, the sense that you're looking at a place that was never meant to be touched, then you already understand why this story matters. Everest is not just a mountain. It's an environment that strips people down to their rawest instincts. It punishes impatience, it amplifies fear, and it rewards the smallest mistakes with consequences that are final. Above the death zone, the human body begins to fail in slow, undeniable steps. Judgment dulls, vision narrows, muscles betray you, and time becomes a cruel illusion. The mind, desperate to survive, starts to invent explanations for things it cannot process. In today's story, you'll follow a climber named Ethan Carver, a seasoned expedition leader who has spent years preparing for one last ascent, one last chance to prove to himself that he belongs among the world's highest summits. He isn't reckless. He isn't naive. He has the gear, the training, and the team. But none of that matters when Everest decides to change the rules. You'll experience the climb through the thin light of headlamps, the tightening grip of altitude, and the subtle psychological traps that appear when exhaustion meets terror. Because this isn't just about surviving the cold. It's about surviving what happens inside the mind when the world turns white, direction disappears, and you start to doubt your own senses. And before we begin, if you enjoy intense survival stories that feel real enough to make you check your own heartbeat, subscribe to the channel. Leave a like so YouTube knows this is the kind of storytelling you want more of. And in the comments, tell me, what country are you watching from right now? I read them and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now take a breath, because the first step onto Everest's upper slope is easy. It's the step after that. The one that changes everything, that no one is prepared for. Ethan Carver first noticed the problem in the way his own thoughts arrived. Slow, heavy, as if each idea had to climb a ladder before it reached him. Camp 4, the South Col, was not a camp in any normal sense. It was a scatter of battered tents, crouched on a wind-scoured saddle of snow and broken rock, perched around 26,000 feet, where the air felt like borrowed privilege. The horizon was a pale curve of emptiness. The sun, when it rose, didn't warm anything. It only revealed what the night had been hiding. Frost crusted on tent seams, oxygen bottles half buried in drifted snow, and faces that looked older than the people wearing them. Ethan sat on his sleeping pad with his back against a duffel bag, packed like a corpse. Every movement made his lungs complain. He forced himself to check his gear again, not because he didn't trust it, but because repetition was a rope for his mind. Harness buckles, carabiners, jumar, crampons, ice axe, headlamp batteries, down suit zippers. Radio clipped where he could reach it, even with thick mitts, oxygen mask seals. Across the tent, Malik Saeed was doing the same, though Malik's calm felt different. Like a man reciting a prayer he'd said so many times it had become muscle memory. Malik was 42, lean, his beard rimmed with ice even inside the tent, his eyes steady in a way that made other climbers look away. He'd climbed Cho Oyu without supplemental oxygen years ago. He wasn't the loudest or the strongest, but he was the one Ethan listened to when the mountains started whispering nonsense. Outside, the wind dragged its nails across nylon. The tent walls flexed and snapped back like a living thing trying to breathe. "We leave at 2200, Ethan said, speaking through the mask strapped around his neck. His voice sounded strange to him, as if it belonged to someone in another tent. Malik nodded. "Weather window is thin." "It's always thin," Ethan replied, and meant it. Their team was small by design. Too many people on the fixed lines meant traffic, and traffic above the death zone turned time into a killer. There was Ethan, expedition leader, Malik, his most experienced teammate. Lina Varga, a tough Hungarian climber with an engineer's mind and a stubbornness that could cut through fear. And Tom Reyes, younger than the rest, 32, strong, disciplined, still carrying that subtle faith that preparation could conquer anything. 2 Sherpas would accompany them to the balcony and possibly beyond, Tenzing Dorje and Pasang Nima, both men who moved through altitude like it was simply a different kind of weather. They weren't side characters in anyone's story. They were the reason stories ever had endings. Ethan checked his watch again. Time had become a strange currency up here, spent too fast, earned too slowly. He could hear the other tents outside, the small private rituals of people preparing to gamble their bodies. A radio crackled from somewhere in the camp, a burst of static, then a voice. "South Col, South Col." Wind increasing on the triangular face. "Keep your eyes." The message dissolved into noise. Ethan looked at Malik. "I don't like that." Malik's expression barely shifted. "We don't have to like it. We just have to respect it." Respect. The word sounded simple until you tried to practice it at 26,000 feet. When it was time, they crawled out into the night. The cold hit like an insult. Headlamps snapped on, beams cutting pale tunnels through darkness. The world beyond those beams did not exist. There was only the crunch of crampons, the hiss of oxygen, and the occasional snap of prayer flags somewhere down the slope, tugged by wind like desperate hands. Tenzing and Pasang moved ahead, checking the fixed line. Ethan followed, then Lina, then Malik, with Tom bringing up the rear. Their spacing was deliberate. Too close and one stumble could become a chain reaction. Too far, and the dark swallowed you. The first section out of Camp 4 was deceptively straightforward, an incline of hard snow and ice leading toward the triangular face. Ethan focused on his breathing, in through the mask, out, fogging the inside of the plastic. He set a rhythm that matched his steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, pause, repeat. After 20 minutes, he could already feel the altitude pressing on his thoughts. He'd been high before, but each time felt new, like your body forgot the lesson on purpose so it could panic properly when you returned. The fixed line glimmered faintly where the headlamps hit it, a thin lifeline vanishing upward. Ethan clipped in and climbed. The metal of the carabiner was so cold it seemed to burn through his glove. He tried not to think about the exposure, about what lay beyond the slope, the Kangshung face dropping into Tibet, the void yawning beside them like a mouth. Lena's voice came through the radio in his ear. "Ethan, pace is good." "Copy," he replied. Static. Then, "Tom, feels like the wind's turning." Ethan stopped for a second, letting the others catch up to a small, flatter section. He turned his head and listened, not to the roar, but to the tone of it. Wind on Everest was rarely quiet, but it had moods. It could be a constant scream, or it could be a low, rolling pressure that felt like the mountain inhaling. Tonight, it sounded like something rearranging itself. "Keep moving," Ethan said. "We don't stop long." They climbed toward the triangular face, and the slope steepened. The headlamps revealed a ribbon of hard ice, polished by thousands of crampons. Ethan's calves started to ache. He welcomed the pain. Pain was honest. It told you your body was still working. What he did not welcome were the moments when his mind drifted, little lapses where he forgot what he was doing for half a second and had to drag himself back. Those lapses were dangerous because they didn't feel like danger. They felt like relief. At around 1 a.m., they reached a narrow section where the fixed line ran across a bulge of ice. Ethan paused to let Tenzing reset an anchor. He looked down and saw the faint glow of Camp 4 far below, a cluster of dim lights trembling in the wind. The sight should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like looking at a ship you'd already left behind. The radio crackled again, not a voice this time, a long, thin whine of interference like something trying to speak through a broken throat. Then Malik's voice, low. "Ethan." "What?" Ethan asked. Malik wasn't looking at Ethan. He was looking up. Ethan followed his gaze. Above them, the slope disappeared into darkness. But for a moment, the wind eased. Just enough for Ethan to notice something else. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the rope. A crunch, then another, measured, slow, like footsteps. Ethan's stomach tightened. He glanced back down the line. Lena was right behind him, clipped in, her headlamp steady. Malik was just behind her. Tom was farther down, a bobbing light. No one was moving except Tenzing at the anchor. Ethan lifted his chin, listening again. The wind picked up, and the sound vanished inside it. He told himself it had been ice shifting. It could happen. The mountain was always settling, cracking, sighing, but the rhythm of it, the way it had sounded like weight being transferred from one foot to another. "Probably icefall noise carried weird," Ethan said, more to himself than anyone. Malik didn't answer right away. Then, maybe was not reassurance. Maybe was Malik's way of saying he didn't have proof, but he didn't have peace either. They moved again. The hours crawled. Ethan kept their pace conservative. Above them, the stars were sharp and bright, indifferent as pins. The moon hung low, giving the snow a faint blue glow beyond the reach of headlamps. By 3 a.m., they reached the balcony, an exposed shelf around 27,500 feet, where climbers often switched oxygen bottles and regrouped. Tenzing and Pasang moved with practiced efficiency, kneeling in the snow, pulling bottles from packs, checking valves with bare fingers for seconds at a time, like men who didn't feel cold the way others did. Ethan crouched, trying to shield his mask from the wind while he swapped bottles. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. He looked at his team. Lena's cheeks were white with frost, but her eyes were sharp. Malik looked almost unchanged, though Ethan knew that was an illusion. Tom was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. "You okay?" Ethan asked Tom. Tom gave a thumbs up. "Yeah, just feels like I'm breathing through a straw." "That's because you are," Lena said, not unkindly. "Don't waste words." Tom tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Ethan checked his watch. If everything went perfectly, they could summit around sunrise and descend before the weather shifted. If anything slowed them, traffic, equipment issues, fatigue, they could be forced into the most dangerous part of the mountain in daylight, when the snow softened and the wind often grew violent. As Ethan clipped his new oxygen bottle into place, he noticed something odd. Pasang was staring toward the ridge above the balcony. His headlamp beam held steady on a patch of darkness where the fixed line vanished. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Pasang's voice was calm, but his eyes weren't. "Someone above," he said. Ethan frowned. "There shouldn't be. We're first push tonight." Tenzing joined them, scanning upward. "No light," he said, "but rope moving." Ethan's mouth went dry. He looked at the fixed line. In the wind, it always trembled slightly, but now in a brief lull he saw it, just a faint, subtle tug, as if something up above had shifted its weight against it. Lena leaned closer. "Could be old tension. Wind." Malik didn't speak. He was listening again, that same stillness in his posture. Ethan keyed his radio. "South Cole, this is Carver team at the balcony. Do you have any teams above us?" "Over." Static. A pause. Then a voice, broken by wind. "Carver. Negative. No one left call after you. Repeat, no one." The radio hissed again. Ethan stared upward. The darkness above the balcony felt thicker now, as if the mountain had draped something over that part of the slope. Tom shifted, uneasy. "So, what's pulling the rope?" No one answered him. Ethan forced himself to move, because standing still was how fear found you. "We continue," he said. "Stay clipped. Stay tight. No wandering, no mistakes." They left the balcony and entered the steep climb toward the south summit, where the air thinned further and the ridge sharpened. The world became a narrow spine of ice and snow with nothing but emptiness on either side. Ethan's headlamp beam caught something ahead, a faint shape near the line. At first he thought it was a rock. Then the wind lifted a flap of fabric. A down hood. A person. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. He moved faster, careful but urgent, climbing until the shape became clear. A climber was slumped against the fixed line, half standing, half hanging, clipped in by a single carabiner. The headlamp on the person's helmet was off. Frost coated the goggles like white glass. The down suit was torn at the shoulder, feathers stiffened by ice. Ethan reached out and touched the climber's arm. It was rigid, cold in a way that no living skin could be. Tom's voice trembled behind him. "Oh my God!" Lena inhaled sharply, then covered her mask with a gloved hand, as if the sight itself could invade her lungs. Ethan's mind tried to identify the climber. Gear color, patches, anything. But the suit was unmarked, the face hidden behind ice. Malik moved up beside Ethan and said quietly, "This is recent." Ethan swallowed. "How can you tell?" Malik pointed to the carabiner. The metal was not fully rimed over. The ice was still thin, not layered. The rope beneath the climber's weight was fresh grooved, like it hadn't been pressed for long. Ethan looked upward again. The fixed line continued into darkness, and the rope still had that faint, occasional tug, barely perceptible, like something higher up was moving. Then, as the wind died for one breathless moment, Ethan heard it again. Footsteps. Above them. Slow. Coming down. And this time, they were close enough that even Tom heard them. Tom whispered, "Someone's up there." But there was no headlamp. No voice. No radio call. Only the sound of weight on ice approaching through the dark. Ethan tightened his grip on the rope, every instinct screaming to descend, to retreat to the balcony, to Camp Afo, to anywhere that wasn't here. But the ridge was narrow, the dead climber blocking part of their path, and whatever was coming down was about to meet them in the tightest section of the climb. The darkness above shifted, just slightly, as if a figure had stepped into the edge of their headlamp beams. And Ethan realized, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with the altitude, that whoever, or whatever, was coming down wasn't using a light. The shape stepped closer, and for one suspended second Ethan's brain refused to name it. A human silhouette, yes. A helmet, yes. A mask, maybe. But no headlamp, no beam, no glow bouncing off the ice. Just a dark figure sliding down the fixed line, as if the night itself had decided to move. "Stop where you are!" Ethan shouted, his voice swallowed by wind the moment it left him. The figure didn't stop. It came down another 2 steps, slow and deliberate, crampon points scraping. Then it paused at the edge of their headlamp spill, the face turned slightly as if listening. Ethan could not see eyes, only a pale smear where skin met frost. Malik leaned forward, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. "Hey," he said low and steady. "We're on the line. Identify yourself." No answer. Tom's breathing had become loud in Ethan's ear, a panicked rasp amplified by his own mask. Lena stayed perfectly still, but her headlamp trembled a fraction as she tracked the stranger's hands. The stranger shifted again, and Ethan saw it. The oxygen mask was hanging loose, not sealed. The hose was disconnected and swinging like a dead tail. Hypoxia. Severe. "Pasang," Ethan said into the radio, clipped to his chest. "Get ready. We might need to clip a rescue tether." Pasang's voice came back instantly. "Copy." Ethan unhooked a spare carabiner from his harness with fingers that felt too thick to obey. The metal squealed against ice when he moved it. The stranger's boots were old model, the kind with worn welts and scuffed rubber. Not Sherpa gear, not any of their team. "Listen to me," Ethan said, forcing calm into his tone. "You're safe. You're with a team from the South Col. What's your name?" The stranger tilted their head like the question was coming from far away. Then, finally, a sound. Thin, cracked, almost a moan. "Light," the stranger whispered. Ethan leaned closer. "You need light." The stranger's hand came up, slow, shaking, and pointed past Ethan's shoulder, toward the slumped body frozen to the fixed line. "Mine," the stranger said, and the word hit Ethan like a shove. "Mine?" Tom swallowed hard. That's your partner?" The stranger lurched forward, reaching toward the dead climber as if to reclaim something. Their glove brushed the corpse's shoulder, then the stranger's fingers hooked the fixed line, gripping it too tight. "Easy," Malik warned, stepping in. "Don't pull!" The stranger yanked. The line snapped taut, and the dead climber's weight shifted. The carabiner creaked. A spray of ice chips flew. Ethan felt the rope jump through his own ascender like a live thing trying to escape. For a fraction of a second, the dead climber lifted, then settled again with a sickening jolt that sent vibrations down the line. Lena cursed in Hungarian, sharp and ugly. "Stop!" The stranger jerked again, harder this time, trying to drag the body upright, trying to pry it free like it was just caught on a branch. Ethan lunged, clamping his gloved hands over the stranger's wrists. "No, you can't!" The stranger's head snapped toward him. In Ethan's headlamp, the face became visible for the first time, skin waxy and pale, lashes crusted with frost, lips split and blue. The eyes were open but unfocused, staring through Ethan rather than at him. Then the stranger hissed, voice suddenly fierce. "He took it!" "Took what?" Ethan demanded. The stranger's gaze flicked to Ethan's chest, to the shiny circle of Ethan's headlamp strap, to the small, blinking radio light. "Mine," the stranger repeated, and the hand shot up, fast, desperate, and grabbed for Ethan's headlamp. Ethan recoiled, but the stranger's glove caught the strap and yanked. The buckle popped loose. Ethan's headlamp slid, and for one terrifying moment his beam swung away, sweeping into blackness beyond the ridge. The world vanished. In the dark, Ethan felt the mountain under his feet become imaginary. He could not see the edge, could not see the fixed line, could not see the dead body, only feel the rope's tension and the stranger's pulling like a drowning man, dragging someone under. "Ethan!" Lena barked, and her light snapped onto him, saving the ridge from disappearing entirely. Malik moved with brutal efficiency. He grabbed the stranger's forearm, twisted, and peeled the gloved hand off Ethan's strap without yanking the rope. "Enough," Malik said, voice like iron. The stranger sagged, sudden weakness flooding in as if the fight had been a last flare of oxygen-starved adrenaline. Pasang stepped forward and clipped a short tether from his harness to the stranger's waist belt. "Now you stay," Pasang said, firm. "No pull." The stranger blinked, slow. He took it," the stranger murmured again, staring at the dead climber as if trying to wake him with sheer will. Ethan reseated his headlamp and tightened the strap until it bit into his hood. He forced air in and out, fighting the urge to hyperventilate. The ridge, the exposure, the darkness, everything had sharpened into a single point of dread. "We need to move away from the body," Ethan said. "This spot is a choke point." Lena shook her head, eyes hard. "If we unclip him, he'll fall." "We don't unclip," Ethan replied. "We secure and pass." Tenzing looked down the line, scanning the slope. "Wind coming," he said quietly. As if the mountain had been waiting for permission, a gust hammered them, so strong it bowed their bodies toward the void. Ethan's hood snapped. Spindrift whipped over their masks, filling the air with glittering needles. The stranger let out a sound that might have been a sob. Can't feel—" "Hands?" Malik asked. The stranger lifted one glove. The fingers were stiff, clawed, severe frostbite or close to it. Ethan's mind raced through options, each worse than the last. If they turned back now, they could probably get the stranger down to the balcony, maybe to Camp 4, but the route was steep, the wind increasing. Descending with an incapacitated climber above the death zone was a slow-motion disaster. If they left the stranger, he would die, not in the abstract, not later. Soon. "Ethan," Lena said, voice tight, "we're burning time. If we keep stopping, we'll be caught high when the sun hits. We'll be the ones who don't come down." Ethan stared at the dead climber again. The hood, the torn shoulder, the way the body leaned against the rope like someone who'd simply decided to rest. He forced himself to look away. "What's your name?" he demanded of the stranger. "Tell me your name." The stranger's lips moved, a whisper drowned by wind. Ethan leaned closer. "Graham," the stranger said. "Graham. Havel." Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew that name. Not personally, but from base camp chatter days ago. An independent climber, solo permit, trying to tag the summit fast with minimal support. A man people described with two opposing words, capable and reckless. "Where's your team?" Ethan asked. Graham's eyes drifted past Ethan into darkness. They turned. I stayed. I heard someone." Ethan waited, holding his breath as if oxygen scarcity could be negotiated by stillness. "I heard someone," Graham repeated, and his gaze snapped down to the corpse. "He took it." Tom's voice shook. "This doesn't make sense." None of it made sense. Not the body here, not Graham coming down with no light, not the rope moving earlier as if something had been shifting above them before Graham appeared. Ethan forced focus. "We get Graham down to the balcony," he said, decisive. "Pasang, you're tethered to him. Malik, you and Lena will manage the pass around the body. Tenzing, you go first and set a space. Tom stays clipped and watches footing. No hero moves." Lena's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Malik gave Ethan a single look that carried both agreement and warning. They began the careful choreography of passing the dead climber. Tenzing moved first, stepping around the slumped body on the uphill side where the snow was harder. Malik followed, bracing the rope with one hand while he unclipped and reclipped with the other. Lena went next, her movements controlled, economical. Tom hesitated, staring at the corpse as if trying not to imagine its last minutes. Ethan went last because Ethan was responsible for everyone. He took one step around the dead climber and felt the ice under his crampon shift, just a millimeter, but it was enough to send a jolt of vertigo through him. He froze, weight centered, and waited for the tremor to stop. Then he heard Graham behind him whisper almost tenderly, "He shouldn't be here." Ethan didn't answer. He finished the pass, clipped back into the fixed line beyond the body, and signaled down. "Bring Graham," he said. Pasang guided Graham forward. Graham moved like an old man, slow, knees barely lifting, every step a negotiation. Twice he tried to glance upward, as if afraid to turn his back on the ridge. They descended. At first it went well. Careful steps, controlled breathing, the fixed line doing its job. But the wind kept building, and with it came spindrift, stinging their eyes and clogging their mask vents. Visibility shrank until headlamps illuminated only swirling white. Ethan's radio crackled. "Carver team, this is South Cole, winds rising, Summit Ridge reports." Static shredded the rest. "How far to balcony?" Tom asked, voice thin. 20 minutes if we keep pace," Lena replied. Graham stumbled. His knees buckled and he sagged against Pasang's tether. Pasang caught him with a grunt, planting his axe and holding both of them steady. "Move," Malik urged. "No stopping." Graham's head lolled, then snapped up abruptly. His eyes widened, pupils huge. "Wait," he rasped. "Listen." Ethan hated himself for obeying. He stopped, turned his head slightly, and listened through the wind. At first there was nothing, just the endless roar. Then, underneath it, a faint rhythmic scrape, not above, below. Crampons. Someone was climbing up toward them. Ethan stared into the swirling white, trying to punch his vision through the snow. Headlamps should have been visible. Voices, radio calls. There was none. The scraping grew closer. Tom's breath caught. "Do you hear that?" Lena nodded once, slow. "Yes." Malik's posture changed. He shifted his weight, bracing. "If someone is coming up with no light," he said, not finishing the thought. A shape emerged, low, hunched, moving on the line. Not a glow, not a beam, just a darker patch of moving shadow in the storm. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Identify yourself," he shouted. The shadow kept coming, climbing with a slow, determined rhythm, hands on the rope, head down. "Stop!" Ethan yelled again. "Radio, say your name!" The figure climbed into their headlamp spill, and Ethan felt his blood turn cold. It wasn't wearing a down suit. It was wearing a torn shell jacket, thin pants, and no oxygen mask. The face was covered, not by a balaclava, but by ice and snow plastered to skin. The eyes were open, and the expression was wrong. Not panic, not exhaustion. Empty. Graham made a strangled noise. "No," he whispered. "No, no." The climber reached them and did not speak. It simply kept coming, as if it intended to climb through them. Ethan pressed himself uphill to make space, expecting the figure to pass. But the figure's hand shot out and grabbed the fixed line between Ethan and Malik, pulling hard, exactly the way Graham had done earlier. The rope jerked. Malik's ascender skipped. Lena's footing faltered. And in that half-second of disrupted tension, the entire chain of safety they'd built, spacing, anchors, balance, wobbled on a knife edge. Ethan lunged for the rope, shouting, "Don't pull!" The figure's grip tightened. Then Tom screamed. Ethan's head whipped around just in time to see Tom's crampon slip off a patch of polished ice. Tom's body swung outward, away from the slope, and the rope snapped taut at his harness with a violent yank. For a heartbeat, Tom dangled over nothing, kicking, trying to find purchase. His headlamp swung wildly, beams slashing through white. "Hold!" Malik roared, digging his axe in. Ethan threw his weight into the line, bracing, muscles screaming. Lena dropped low, anchoring herself like a stake. Pasang locked his tether, keeping Graham from being pulled into the chaos. Tom's scream turned into frantic gasps. I can't! Ethan reached for Tom, inching along the rope, but the figure was still there, still gripping the line, still pulling as if it wanted the rope to fail. Ethan slammed his gloved fist into the figure's wrist. "Let go!" The figure didn't react to pain. It didn't flinch. It just stared at Ethan, with those empty eyes, frost cracking at the corners. Graham's voice rose, ragged with terror. That's him! That's the one! He took it! Ethan didn't have time to ask what it was. Tom was dying by inches. Malik leaned in close to Ethan's ear, voice steady despite the strain. "Cut the figure off the rope!" Ethan's mind recoiled. Cut someone off the fixed line, up here, in this storm. But then he looked again at the thin clothes, the lack of oxygen, the ice-caked face, and his stomach dropped further. This climber was already dead. The body was moving on momentum, on hypoxic madness, on the mountain's cruel physics. Or it was something Ethan couldn't name without losing his grip on sanity. Ethan fumbled for the knife clipped to his harness, fingers clumsy and thick. He got it free and pressed the blade to the figure's glove where it gripped the rope, not the rope itself. He couldn't risk damaging the line. He sawed at the glove's seam, desperate. The fabric resisted. Wind slammed them again. Tom's body swung, harness biting into his waist. "Ethan!" Lena shouted. "He's slipping!" Ethan cut harder. The glove finally split. The figure's fingers, bare, blackened, frostbitten to the bone, were exposed. For the first time the figure reacted. It hissed, a sound of animal outrage, and its grip faltered. Ethan seized the moment. He grabbed the figure's hand and ripped it off the rope. The figure toppled. For a fraction of a second it hung there, off balance, reaching for the line again. Its eyes met Ethan's, blank, furious, pleading, impossible. Then gravity took it. The shape slid past Ethan's headlamp beam and vanished downward into the storm, pulled into white with no sound that Ethan could hear over the wind. The rope steadied, just slightly. "Tom!" Ethan shouted. "Kick in! Find the ice!" Tom's boots scraped. Once, twice. Then his crampons caught, and he slammed his body into the slope like a man trying to become part of the mountain. Malik and Lena hauled on the line, inching Tom upward. Ethan grabbed Tom's shoulder strap and helped drag him back onto the ridge. Tom collapsed, chest heaving, eyes wide and wild. I thought—" Tom stammered, unable to finish. Ethan didn't comfort him. Comfort was a luxury they couldn't afford. He looked up the slope toward the balcony, only swirling white. He looked down the slope. Nothing. No sign of the falling figure. No sound. Graham was shaking so hard his teeth chattered even through his maskless mouth. "It followed me," he whispered. "It followed me down. It wanted the line. It wanted—" "Enough!" Malik snapped. Not cruel, but commanding. "Breathe. Stay upright." Ethan keyed his radio with stiff fingers. "South Cole, this is Carver team. We encountered 2 climbers above the balcony, one deceased on the line, one disoriented descending. Another climber moving without light, possible hypoxia. We are aborting and descending with 1 casualty and 1 rescued climber. Repeat aborting, over." Static, then a broken response. "Carver, copy, winds, worsening, get down, now." Ethan looked at his team. Lena's eyes were hard but frightened. Tom was pale under frost, shock written into every movement. Pasang still held Graham like a tethered ghost. Tenzing scanned the slope with a Sherpa's instinct that didn't need visibility to sense danger. "We go," Ethan said. "No more stops." They moved, descending toward the balcony in a tight, desperate line. Each step a fight against wind, fear, and the mind's crumbling edges. And as they descended, Ethan couldn't shake one thought, sharp as an ice pick behind his eyes. That second climber had been coming up from below, from the direction of Camp 4, meaning it had been on the route beneath them the whole time, moving in the storm, without a light. And if it could climb up to them once, it could do it again. By the time the faint shape of the balcony finally emerged through the spindrift, Ethan's legs felt like hollow pillars. They reached the shelf and collapsed into crouches, trying to shelter behind a snow bulge. Tenzing pointed toward the fixed line that led down to the South Cole. "Look," he said. Ethan followed the gesture. There, half buried in wind-driven snow, was a headlamp, its strap torn, its lens scratched. The light was off. Ethan's stomach dropped. Because the headlamp was not any of theirs, and beside it, pressed into the snow like a dragged mark, was a trail, fresh, shallow grooves leading away from the fixed line, away from the normal descent route, and into the blank, featureless white. Lena stared at it, voice barely audible. Someone left the line. Tom swallowed, eyes huge. Who would do that? Graham's whisper floated through the storm like a confession. He did. Ethan felt the cold tighten inside his chest in a way oxygen couldn't fix, because the grooves weren't leading upward. They were leading down, toward Camp 4, toward the only place on the South Col that still had tents, oxygen, sleeping bags, and people who thought the worst of the night was already behind them. The balcony didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Ethan crouched behind a low ridge of wind-packed snow, forcing his lungs to keep rhythm, while his eyes tracked the shallow grooves cutting away from the fixed line. In good visibility, a person might follow those marks, 10, 20 steps, before realizing the mistake and correcting it. In this storm, a single wrong turn could become a quiet disappearance. Tenzing brushed snow off the abandoned headlamp with the edge of his glove. The strap was torn clean, like it had been yanked hard. He held it up to his light, then shook his head once. Not ours. Lena stared at the grooves. How recent. Pasang leaned closer, studying the marks like a man reading handwriting. Very. Wind hasn't filled it yet. Tom's voice came out thin, almost childish. So someone walked off the line on purpose? No one answered quickly, because the truth was worse than any guess. People didn't leave the line on purpose up here, unless they were confused, panicked, or already half gone. Graham sat slumped on his pack with his bare mouth exposed to the cold, lips trembling purple. He kept looking toward the white void where the grooves vanished, as if afraid something would step back out of it. He did, he whispered again. He did it. Ethan moved close enough for Graham to see his eyes. Graham, look at me. He waited until those unfocused pupils finally settled. Who is he? Graham swallowed, throat working painfully. The climber, he rasped. The one without light. Malik's voice cut through, calm and unforgiving. Hypoxia can make you assign intention to chaos. That's what your brain does to survive. It invents a reason. Graham flinched as if struck. You didn't see his face. We saw enough, Malik replied. We saw a man out of his mind and out of oxygen. That's real. That's deadly. It doesn't need anything else. Ethan believed Malik, wanted to believe him, because the alternative, some presence stalking the route, was the kind of thought that made experienced climbers start making mistakes. But the grooves in the snow were real. The torn headlamp was real. And somewhere below, Camp 4 was full of sleeping climbers who didn't yet know the night had teeth. We go down, Ethan said, decisive. Now, we warn the col. We get Graham down. We get Tom down. No one follows those tracks. Tom looked like he wanted to argue, like he needed to confirm the horror by chasing it, but the wind answered for Ethan, slamming into them with a force that made every man brace instinctively. The storm wasn't easing, it was tightening. They clipped back to the fixed line and began their descent from the balcony, moving in a slow chain. Tenzing first, then Lena, then Ethan, then Malik, with Pasang tethered to Graham and Tom behind, watched like a fragile cargo. Descending was supposed to be easier than climbing. On Everest it was often worse. Your legs were already broken down, your focus was eroded, and the mountain didn't forgive fatigue. It punished it. Ethan kept his eyes glued to the rope, to the next anchor, to the dull shine of metal half buried in ice. He counted steps again. 1, 2, 3, pause, because counting was a leash for panic. Halfway down, the wind shifted direction and the spindrift thickened into a solid curtain. The headlamps illuminated only swirling white, and the world became a featureless tunnel. Ethan could no longer see Tenzing's boots. He could only see the rope moving forward, vanishing into storm. He heard Graham behind him make a strangled noise. Ethan turned his head. "What?" Graham's eyes were fixed on the slope below, staring into nothing. I hear it," he whispered. Ethan listened. The wind roared. The rope creaked. His own breath thundered in his mask. Then faint, wrong, rhythmic, scrape, scrape, scrape crampons again, not above this time, below. Ethan's spine tightened. He didn't want to give the sound meaning, but he couldn't pretend he hadn't heard it. Malik's voice came tight in his ear. "Keep moving. Don't turn this into a discussion." They continued, and the sound faded, either swallowed by wind or left behind. Ethan didn't know which was worse. By the time Camp 4's faint glow finally emerged through the storm, it looked like an illusion. Small pools of light, trembling behind nylon, fragile as candles in a hurricane. Ethan's relief lasted exactly 3 seconds, because one tent was wrong. A high, jagged flap of nylon was snapping violently, like a wound opening and closing. The tent was partially collapsed, its guy lines torn loose. "Stop," Ethan said, and his voice had that dangerous edge, the one that made people obey without asking why. Tenzing moved ahead with his ice axe ready, not as a weapon, but as a tool to anchor himself if the wind tried to take him. He reached the damaged tent and shone his headlamp inside. The interior was a mess, sleeping bag half out, oxygen bottle rolling, a pack overturned. And there, near the entrance, was a glove, blackened at the fingertips, frostbite, recent. Tom's breath hitched. "No!" Ethan scanned the surrounding tents. Some lights were on now, headlamps flickering, figures stirring. Someone shouted in the wind, words torn away. Ethan ran to the nearest intact tent, ripped the zipper down, and stuck his head inside. "Wake up!" he barked. "Everyone awake!" A man blinked at him, confused, face puffy with altitude. "What? Ethan? What's happening? How many are in this camp?" Ethan demanded. "Count your team, now!" More heads emerged. More zippers opened. The camp came alive in a rush of panic and cold confusion. A Sherpa from another team stumbled out bareheaded, eyes wide. "We lost," he began, then swallowed. "One missing. He went to pee, he never come back." Ethan felt the words like a punch. A man had stepped a few meters from a tent and vanished. Lena leaned close to Ethan, voice low. "Those grooves from the balcony." Ethan nodded once. It fit too neatly. Someone had left the fixed line and come down toward Camp 4, either stumbling into camp in delirium or passing near it. Either way, people were disappearing in the same night. Malik grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "We don't chase. Not in this wind. Not with Graham and Tom half broken." "I know," Ethan said. Then he looked at the torn tent again. The glove, the scattered gear. This wasn't a man who wandered and calmly returned. This was chaos, struggle, panic. Peisang lowered Graham onto a sleeping pad outside one of the tents. Graham's hands were useless claws. His face was pale, and his breathing had a wet rattle to it now. Dangerous. Tom sat nearby, shaking, staring at the darkness beyond the tents, as if it might blink back. Ethan forced himself to act like the leader he'd promised to be. "Oxygen!" he shouted. "Bring a bottle! Bring hot water! Radio's on!" "Head counts for every team, right now!" People moved, stumbling in thick boots, but the momentum of command cut through fear. A woman handed Ethan a radio. Another Sherpa brought an oxygen bottle, twisting the valve with practiced speed. Ethan knelt beside Graham and fitted a spare mask over his face, sealing it tight. "You breathe," Ethan ordered. "In and out. Slow." Graham's eyes fluttered. He was here," he whispered. Ethan kept his voice flat. "Who?" Graham's gaze slid toward the torn tent. "He came down." Malik crouched opposite Ethan, checking Graham's pulses through thick gloves. "His lungs sound bad," Malik said. "Could be edema starting." Ethan's mind sharpened. High-altitude pulmonary edema wasn't a ghost story. It was a killer that drowned you from the inside. "We need him down," Ethan said. "Now," Malik agreed. A shout rose from the edge of camp. "Here, over here!" Ethan stood and pushed through drifting snow toward the voice. A climber was pointing at the ground near the camp's outer perimeter, where the wind had carved shallow hollows. More grooves, more drag marks, and something else. A radio. Half-buried, antenna snapped, the casing scratched like it had been scraped across rock. Ethan picked it up and turned it over. A name label, smeared but readable. Graham Havel. Ethan looked back toward Graham, now staring blankly at the torn tent, as if watching a memory replay. Lena's voice came tight. "So he dropped it here." Malik's jaw hardened. "Or someone took it from him and brought it down." The camp fell into a sickening hush around them, because the implication was obvious. A climber had moved through their tents in this storm, possibly confused, possibly violent, possibly already dead in every way that mattered, and people had been close enough to touch him without realizing it. Ethan thumbed the radio's buttons. Nothing. Then, on instinct, he held the side switch down. A burst of static answered. Then, impossibly, a sliver of recorded audio crackled out, faint and broken, like a voice trapped inside ice. "Don't follow the—" The rest dissolved into noise. Ethan stared at the radio as if it had spoken from a grave. Lena whispered, "Did you record that?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "Not me." Malik didn't look surprised. He looked grim. "People record messages when they think they're not coming back." A woman from another team pushed forward, eyes wide. "My partner," she said, voice shaking. "My partner is missing. He's not in his tent." Ethan turned, forcing his voice to carry authority even as his gut tightened. "No one goes beyond the tent perimeter. No solo trips. Buddy system for everything. Everything. If you need to relieve yourself, you do it in a bottle. You do not step into the dark alone." Some protested. Some swore. Some nodded silently, already terrified. Then the wind shifted again, and one of the camp headlamps flickered out as if slapped. A tent wall snapped hard enough to sound like a gunshot. Someone screamed. Short, sharp. Ethan whirled. A figure was moving between tents, not running, not stumbling. Moving with a slow, purposeful gait, head down against the wind. Ethan's heart seized. "Hey!" he shouted. The figure didn't stop. Ethan started forward. Then Malik grabbed him. "No!" Malik said through clenched teeth. "You don't chase shadows in a storm. It's in our camp," Ethan hissed. Tenzing stepped ahead of them, axe in hand, headlamp beam locked on the moving shape. "Stop!" Tenzing shouted in Nepali, then in broken English. "Stop now!" The figure paused, just long enough for Ethan's headlamp to catch the torn fabric of a jacket. Thin pants, no oxygen mask, the same wrong silhouette they'd seen on the line. Tom let out a strangled sob behind them. "That's him." The figure turned its face toward the camp lights, and Ethan saw ice plastered to skin, eyes open, expression empty as stone. Then it stepped closer to the nearest tent and reached for the zipper. Inside that tent, someone was still sleeping. Ethan felt every rational rule snap under the weight of a single primal truth. If that zipper opened, someone would die. He ripped free of Malik's grip and charged, boots punching through snow, one hand locked on the fixed line that ran through camp as if it could anchor his sanity. "Get away from the tent!" he roared. The figure didn't react to the words. It simply pulled. The zipper teeth separated. A warm puff of air escaped, carrying the smell of sweat and breath, human life, fragile and tempting in the cold. Ethan lunged, grabbing the figure's wrist. The skin beneath the thin glove felt like frozen rope. The figure turned slowly toward him, and in that close, brutal distance, Ethan realized the eyes weren't just empty. They were fixed on something behind Ethan, something inside the tent, like a starving man staring at food. Ethan yanked harder, trying to pull the figure back. The figure resisted with a strength that didn't match its thin clothes, its dead-looking face. It leaned toward the open tent flap again, reaching with its free hand. And from inside the tent, a voice murmured, thick with sleep. "What's going on?" Ethan's blood went cold, because the sleeper was waking up at the exact moment the storm, the camp, and whatever this was had converged into the same square meter of air. And then the figure opened its mouth, no words, just a dry, cracking sound like ice breaking, while its hand slid into the tent, searching. Ethan braced his feet and pulled with everything he had, feeling the rope of his own fear tighten around his chest. Because if he lost his grip for even a second, the night would reach into the tent and take one more person, quietly, efficiently, and the camp would never hear them scream over the wind. Ethan planted his boots wide in the snow, locked his hips, and pulled like he was hauling a man out of a crevasse. The figure's wrist didn't bend the way a living wrist should. It wasn't stiff like wood, just strangely unresponsive, as if pain and fear had been filed off. The hand kept probing inside the tent, blind and hungry, fingers scraping against fabric and sleeping gear. "Wake up!" Ethan shouted into the opening. "Get out! Now!" A muffled groan answered. A sleeping bag rustled. Then a headlamp flickered on from inside, a weak yellow glow that made the tent look suddenly warm, human, and unbearably fragile. The figure leaned closer to that glow. Ethan felt it, not as a thought but as a deep animal certainty, that the figure was drawn to light and oxygen the way drowning men were drawn to air. He yanked harder, trying to peel the figure away from the tent flap. The figure's head turned slowly, as if deciding between Ethan's grip and the promise inside the tent. Its mouth opened again, that dry, crackling sound, teeth clicking, lips splitting. A breath wheezed out, raw and empty. Malik's voice cut through the wind behind Ethan. "Ethan, get off him now!" Ethan couldn't. If he let go, the figure would be inside the tent. The sleeper would stumble out half awake, bare hands, no mask, no idea what was happening, and the storm would swallow him in seconds. Tenzing charged in from Ethan's left, axe in hand, not raised to strike, raised to threaten, to block. "Back!" Tenzing barked, stepping between the figure and the tent opening. The figure didn't react to Tenzing's voice. It reacted to the tent's warm air. It lurched forward. Tenzing slammed the flat of his axe handle into the figure's shoulder. A hard shove meant to knock, not kill. The figure stumbled, but it didn't fall. It twisted, grabbed for the axe shaft with frost-blackened fingers, and for a second the two men were locked together. Tenzing braced and furious, the figure silent and relentless. Ethan saw his chance. He hooked his arm under the figure's elbow and wrenched backward, while Malik stepped in and clipped a short tether around the figure's waist with brutal speed. Pasang appeared on the other side and added a second tether, anchoring it to a snow picket hammered near the tent line. The figure jerked once, twice, like a hooked fish. The tethers held. Inside the tent, the sleepy climber finally pushed his head out, eyes squinting, face puffy, mask hanging loose around his neck. "What the hell?" "Back in!" Ethan snapped. "Zip it! Mask on!" The climber hesitated, stunned by the sight. A half-dressed stranger straining against ropes, eyes wide and dead-looking, frost cracking off his cheeks. "Now!" Malik repeated, and something in Malik's tone erased the man's confusion. He ducked back inside and zipped the tent shut with shaking hands. For a moment the camp stood frozen around them, other climbers half out of tents, headlamps flickering, radios crackling, breath steaming. No one wanted to name what they'd just seen. Naming it made it real. Ethan forced himself to kneel, keeping distance from the figure's hands. "Can you hear me?" he shouted over the wind. "What's your name?" The figure's eyes slid to Ethan's headlamp, then to the bulge of oxygen bottle behind Ethan's shoulder. The gaze lingered there, like thirst. "Name," Ethan repeated. The figure's lips moved, a whisper so thin Ethan had to lean in. "Eli." Malik's eyes sharpened. Eli who? The figure blinked slowly, as if searching through fog for the rest of the word. Eli Brennan. Ethan looked at Malik. That name wasn't just base camp gossip. Ethan had heard it in a briefing. A climber from a mid-sized commercial team, separated in the upper camps earlier in the week, presumed descending. Not dead. Not accounted for. Eli, Ethan said, fighting to keep his voice steady, do you have oxygen? Eli stared at him, then down at his own chest, as if surprised to find it empty. He opened his mouth. No answer. Just that shallow wheeze. Hypoxia, Malik said quietly. Severe. He's been without oxygen too long. Tenzing gestured at Eli's bare hands. Frostbite, he added. Very bad. A woman from another tent stumbled forward, eyes wide with recognition. That's him, she whispered. He was in our camp. He left his tent last night. We thought he was... Her voice collapsed. She covered her mouth with a gloved hand. Ethan felt the camp's fear tilt into something sharper. If Eli Brennan had wandered through camp before in this storm, he could have opened any tent. He could have dragged any climber out, not out of cruelty, out of confusion, out of instinct, or because something had happened to him on the ridge that broke him into this. Head counts, Ethan shouted again, louder. Every team! Right now. I want names. I want numbers. No one assumes. A few people moved. Others stood frozen, headlamps trained on Eli, as if watching him might prevent what came next. Then Eli's body tensed. He lunged hard against the tethers, and the snow picket groaned. Passan caught the tether and braced, boots digging in. Eli's eyes weren't on Ethan now. They were on the tent behind him, on the faint glow from inside, on warmth. Ethan's throat tightened. Turn your lights off, he ordered the nearest climbers. Inside tents only, no open flaps. Someone protested, but... Do it, Malik said, and the protest died. One by one, headlamps angled down, dimmed, disappeared inside tents. The camp's glow shrank. The storm grew louder, as if it had been waiting for the light to fade. Eli went still. He stared at the darkness, chest rising and falling too fast. And in that sudden quiet of reduced light, Ethan heard something else, a faint metallic clicking, like a carabiner tapping ice, from the far edge of camp. Ethan turned his head slowly. A tent zipper was moving, not ripping open, not snapping, being worked, carefully, deliberately. Ethan's blood ran cold because Eli Brennan was tethered right in front of him, meaning someone else was out there, and they were awake enough to use a zipper. Ethan stood so fast his vision tunneled. Who's in that tent? He shouted toward the shadowed corner of Camp 4. No one answered. The zipper kept sliding. Tenzing moved first, low and fast, axe in one hand, the other hand ready to grab the fixed line. Malik followed, not running, never running at this altitude, but moving with purpose, shoulders squared against the wind. Ethan started after them, then stopped himself and looked back. Eli was still tethered, eyes locked on the same corner. His mouth opened slightly and a sound came out, not words, not a scream. A soft, excited breath, like anticipation. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to stay with the tethered threat. But leadership wasn't comfort, it was choosing the least fatal option. He shoved his radio into his mouthpiece. South Col teams, listen, possible second climber moving through Camp 4. Keep tents closed. Buddy system, confirm head counts. Over. Static answered, then a broken voice. Copy. Winds. Increasing. Don't. Leave camp. Ethan ignored the last part and followed Malik and Tenzing. The tent in question was smaller, half buried. The zipper had opened a hand's width. A headlamp beam flickered from inside like a trapped firefly. Tenzing reached the flap and yanked it wider. A man's face popped out, eyes wild, beard iced, mask hanging loose. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "I heard—" "Stay inside," Malik ordered. "Who's with you?" The man blinked in confusion. "No one. I'm solo." Tenzing shoved a gloved hand into the tent and pulled out a second sleeping bag. Empty. Then he pulled out a harness and an oxygen mask. The mask was torn clean at the strap. Ethan's stomach dropped. "You had a partner," he said. The man's face drained of color. He went out. "Just a minute. I heard him unzip." Then his eyes darted to the wind and the darkness. Then nothing. Tenzing pointed to the snow beside the tent. A shallow, dragged groove, fresh, leading away, not toward the fixed line, away from camp, into the storm. Ethan felt the night closing around them, not as an idea, but as a physical pressure. "No one goes after him," Ethan said hard. The solo climber's voice cracked. "You can't just... You die out there," Malik said flat, "and then someone else dies trying to recover you." The climber looked like he might bolt anyway, like grief and panic had melted his judgment. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice to something that could reach through shock. "Listen to me. If he's out there, he's either close and disoriented, or he's already gone. You running into whiteout will not save him. It will add you to the list." The man's eyes filled with tears that froze at the corners. He sank back into the tent like his bones had suddenly softened. Ethan forced himself to turn away from that grief and scan the camp. Lights were dim now. Tents were sealed. The storm roared, and somewhere between those nylon walls, people were holding their breath, afraid that the next zipper sound would be their own. Ethan walked back toward Eli Brennan, every step a fight against the wind. He expected to find the tethered climber still straining toward warmth. Instead, Eli was calm, too calm. He sat on the snow as if placed there, back straight, hands out in front like broken tools. His eyes tracked Ethan's approach without blinking. Graham, propped on a pad nearby with oxygen running, watched Eli with terror that looked older than the night. "He's waiting," Graham whispered. Ethan crouched. "Waiting for what?" Graham's lips trembled. "For me to sleep." Ethan's skin prickled. "Why?" Graham swallowed and finally gave Ethan something solid. "When I was above the balcony, when I lost my light, I found a radio, not mine, someone else's. It was recording." Ethan held up Graham's recovered radio. "This?" Graham nodded weakly. "I heard it before, a voice saying not to follow the line. Then..." He squeezed his eyes shut. "Then I heard breathing, not mine, close, like someone was right behind me in the storm." Malik cut in, impatient with fear turning into myth. "That's hypoxia." Graham snapped his eyes open. "Then explain why the breathing kept matching my steps." Silence followed, not because anyone believed in monsters, but because everyone knew the mind could do terrible, convincing things when it was starved and cold and scared. Ethan looked at Eli again. "Eli," he said, "do you remember leaving your tent?" Eli's gaze drifted past Ethan toward the ridge above Camp 4. His lips moved. "Rope," he whispered. Ethan leaned closer. "What about the rope?" Eli's throat worked. "Pulled." Ethan felt his heart thud once, hard. "Someone pulled you off the line?" Eli blinked, slow. Then his mouth opened wider and a sound came out, something between a laugh and a cough. "Not someone," he rasped. "Something cold." Malik straightened, jaw tight. "We're done with this," he said. "Ethan, we need to descend. Graham is sick, Tom is in shock, and now this camp is unraveling." He was right. And yet Ethan couldn't shake the simplest, ugliest truth. If they descended now, they would leave missing climbers in the storm and a delirious, violent man tethered in Camp 4, with exhausted teams guarding tents like prey animals. The situation wasn't survivable for long. Ethan keyed his radio. "South Call, this is Carver. We have one climber found in severe hypoxia, Eli Brennan, tethered. One solo climber reports partner missing from Camp 4, last seen leaving tent. Storm ongoing. Recommend all teams prepare immediate descent at first safe window. Over." Static. Then, "Carver, understood. Sunrise, window maybe, but winds. The message broke apart. Ethan looked up at the black ridge. He couldn't see the dead climber anymore. He couldn't see the balcony. He couldn't see anything but swirling white. And then, from somewhere near the fixed line just beyond camp, a scream erupted, short, sharp, and instantly swallowed by wind. Ethan turned and ran. He reached the line to see a woman on her knees, clawing at the snow with bare panic. A man stood beside her, pointing with a shaking hand. "There!" he yelled. "He was right there. He unclipped. He—" Ethan followed the gesture and saw only emptiness where the slope fell away into darkness. The fixed line trembled, not with wind, but with the aftershock of weight. A carabiner lay on the snow, snapped open. Someone had unclipped. Someone had stepped off. And the woman's scream turned into a sound Ethan would never forget, a grief so sudden and raw, it felt like the mountain itself had torn open. Malik grabbed Ethan's arm, eyes blazing. "We are leaving at first light," he said, "or we all die here." Ethan stared down into the void, feeling the storm press against his mask like a hand. He wanted to argue. He wanted to promise rescue. He wanted to fix what Everest had broken. But the mountain didn't care what he wanted. He turned back toward camp, toward Graham's rattling breath and Tom's shaking hands, toward Eli Brennan, tethered like a dangerous animal, staring at the tents as if they were food. And as Ethan walked, he realized something that made his stomach twist tighter than the altitude ever could. Eli wasn't watching the camp at random. He was watching one specific tent, the one where Tom Reyes had crawled in to warm up, the one with the freshest oxygen bottles, the one closest to Ethan's own. Ethan stopped, suddenly certain, because if Eli's mind was still hunting, still drawn to air and warmth, then it wasn't going to wait for sunrise. It was going to move the moment the camp's vigilance finally slipped, even for a single exhausted blink.